Hey guys, in this video I want to talk about a mistake that some of you might be doing right now and they don't even know it. And this mistake can cost you a lot of damage in the end game, so it is very important to understand these concepts that I'm gonna show you in this video. And it has to do with the way how damage is calculated in the new Lord of Hatred expansion for Diablo 4. So for that we will take a look at damage buckets in Diablo 4. Maybe some of you are already familiar with this concept of damage buckets. But yeah, that's what we will do today. And in the end, you will hopefully avoid mistakes that I also did in the first days of the expansion, just because I forgot how the new damage calculation is working. So let's begin. And a good example to illustrate this problem is, for example, this ring that I have right now in my Cold Traps rogue build. By the way, you can also check out this guide on this channel if you're interested in the new Cold Trap archetype. Very fun. But anyways, this ring, you can see it has 3 different damage multipliers. And damage multipliers is kinda a new system in Diablo 4. So before this expansion we used to have a bunch of different additive damage. So we had different, many different damage types, and all of those were additive and they were on your items. And now your items, like we got completely rid of additive damage on our items, on our gear, and now we only have these damage multipliers. So here you can see on my ring I have dexterity, I have all damage multiplier, I have vulnerable damage multiplier, and damage over time multiplier. So this is kinda easy to understand. So far you are playing a build, your build is dealing some kind of damage. So for example, I'm playing with damage over time with my poison trap, and I'm also dealing cold damage, and I'm making enemies vulnerable. So all of these 3 damage multipliers are working for my current build. But the crucial part here is how this damage, or how you can actually maximize your damage using this different damage multiplier buckets. And for that reason we can talk about this topic in a sense where we illustrate this as damage buckets. So now I think I will turn off my camera here. So here you can imagine the damage as buckets. And here the first important thing to understand this concept is each damage bucket has its own category. So for example, on the left side you can see we have a damage bucket which is filled with all damage, cold damage, poison, shadow, and basically all other elemental types of damage. So also fire, lightning, and so on. So the entire elemental damage types together with the old damage is considered as one damage bucket. Then the second one is only for vulnerable damage. So this also reminds me very heavily about the first season in Diablo 4. Maybe you also remember these times. In these times, vulnerable damage was also a separate damage bucket, and for that reason all players wanted to get gear with vulnerable damage affixes, because this was a separate damage bucket which gave you a lot of damage. And now again we have vulnerable damage as a separate multiplier basically. And the last damage bucket is crit damage or damage over time. By the way, you can't have both damage multipliers on your gear, so you either have crit damage or damage over time. And the same goes or belongs to this elemental damage bucket. You only will have gear with either all damage or one kind of elemental damage like cold, poison, or shadow. And so the main idea now, and oh yeah, by the way, you have of course other damage multipliers in the game, but I don't want to talk about the entire formula, the entire damage calculation formula in Diablo 4. I just want to focus on this gear relevant damage multipliers. But of course you also have your aspects, you have your glyphs, your paragon nodes, main stat, additive damage, runes, talisman, and many more sources in the game, which are also multiplicative. But again, let's go back to the damage buckets. So here you have these 3 kind of damage categories and damage buckets. And now the very important thing and the mistake that you might do here is your goal should always be to have equally large damage buckets. So let's imagine we fill these buckets with water now, and your goal should always be that you fill them completely equally or as equal as possible. So let's say we have 100% cold damage or all damage, this is the same. Then we have 100% vulnerable damage, and we have 100% damage over time, because we are playing a damage over time build. So how the damage calculation looks like now is we have 1 plus 1, because 100% is equal to 1. And we basically have this 3 times now, okay? Because we have completely equally distributed damage buckets. So the math looks like this. We have 1 plus 1, which is 2, multiplied by, again, 1 plus 1 is 2, multiplied by 2. So now we have a total damage multiplier of 8, considering we have equally distributed values over all of these 3 damage buckets. And now let's take a look at a different example. So we just delete all of these numbers here. I hope this was clear, by the way, but it should be not too difficult so far. And now let's imagine we don't have these buckets filled with water equally, but instead you decide to focus entirely on cold damage, for example. So you're playing a cold build and all of your items have cold damage multiplier. You have 0 damage inside your vulnerable damage bucket. And let's say you have also 0 damage inside your damage over time or crit damage bucket. So now the case is that we have 300% cold damage, but 0 here and 0 here. So the math now looks even more simple. We again have to add 1 and this percentage value, which is 3. So now our total damage multiplier, now our total damage multiplier is equal to 4. Remember, before that we had 8, and now we only have 4. So this is a completely different story, and meaning that if you're doing this wrong, okay, you have 2 empty damage buckets and only fill up 1 bucket, you are basically dealing only half of your damage that would be possible with the same values. And yeah, that is the crucial part here. So your goal should always be to try getting these buckets as equal as possible. Of course, this won't work all the time, but only this way you can make sure that you have the maximum amount of damage with your character. And this is a mistake I also did in the beginning. I had 0 vulnerable damage multipliers on my gear. You also have to keep in mind vulnerable damage is the least common one. So for example, on your weapons, you can't have vulnerable damage multipliers. You can only have damage over time, critical strike damage, and the elemental damage bucket. So you can have the left one and the right one, but you can't have vulnerable damage on your weapons. So for that reason, it is even more important that you get as many vulnerable damage multipliers on the rest of your gear, like on your gloves, on your amulet, and on your rings, because you can't get them on your weapons. And for that reason, like I mentioned, I also did this mistake. I had 0 vulnerable damage multipliers on my entire gear. So for that reason, this bucket here was completely empty, and I was only filling the left and the right one. And as you saw in this example, I was dealing way less damage than I could deal. And yeah, this is just something I forgot, even though I knew that we have a different calculation now for the damage, but I just forgot it. And for that reason, I believe many players also do this mistake or do not even know about this change. So yeah, your goal should be to distribute damage multipliers equally. Like I mentioned, vulnerable damage on gloves, amulet, and rings. On your weapons, you can't have vulnerable damage. And yeah, for the gems, just take the element type that belongs to your build. They roll higher than all damage. All damage usually rolls lower than elemental damage. And one last thing that I want to show you. Of course, you can also temper damage on your weapons. So for example, here you can see I have damage over time multiplier on my as an affix on my bow, but I also have damage over time as an temper. So here you have different temper recipes for damage, but keep in mind all of this temper damage is additive damage. It has nothing to do with these buckets here, because additive damage belongs into its own damage category, and you can see it here. Okay, additive damage is like its own bucket, which also gets multiplied with all of the other buckets. But this damage over time on my bow as a temper is not the same damage over time as this bucket here. Okay, this is very important. So don't confuse yourself into thinking this is the same. Yeah, very important as well. But just try to get equally distributed damage buckets with all the multipliers that belongs to your build. This is the main part here. This is the important thing that I want to give to you in this video. Okay guys, I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something and you avoid this mistake in the future. So yeah, if you're interested in rogue guides, check out my channel. I also published a guide for Poison Trap, or actually Frostbite Cold Trap, which is very powerful, very fun. So yeah, check this out on my channel as well if you're interested in that. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I see you next one. Have a nice day and bye bye.